Hey, Christ Central Pastor Owen here. We're making this video for those of you that were unable to make our last family meeting. As a staff and as elders and as leaders of the church for the past several months, we've had a posture of listening from the first family meeting to the church feedback survey, and through many informal conversations, we have sought to listen and to hear you, to see really what the concerns and the burdens of the members of our church are. And this family meeting is really our reporting back to you on how we plan to address and deal with the concerns that were raised. So we have identified 5 major areas of concern that we want to address as a staff. The first is improving pastoral connection and care with the congregation. The second is improving youth ministry to make it more engaging. Third, making all church worship more inclusive and more engaging. And fourth, addressing the volume issue in the context of Sunday morning worship services. And lastly, improving communication between the leadership and the church. So the first area of concern that I'm going to address is improving pastoral connection and care between the pastors and the congregation. Our current flock system has elders of our church serving as flock leaders, and currently we have 9 ruling elders, and they're responsible for 9 flocks. Our church is divided up into 9 flocks, and each flock consists of various community groups. But we're going to move away from that and redeploy our elders to work more closely and strategically with the ministries of our church. And going forward, we're going to divide our church into 4 flocks, which will be led and supervised and shepherded by the pastors themselves. Flock number 1 will be led by Pastor Albert Young. And his flock will consist of community groups that are associated largely with married couples without kids, and in addition to that, Bridges community groups. And also going forward, every member of our church who is not in a community group but falls within that life stage of being a married couple without kids will automatically be placed in Pastor Albert's flock. Flock 2 will be led by Pastor Bobby Suh, and his flock will consist of community groups, families with young children who are involved in Central Kids Ministry, and in addition to that, Bridges community groups, and also for families with young kids who are in the elementary school age range, but who are not members of a community group, they will also be assigned to Pastor Bobby's flock. Flock 3 will be led by Pastor Huey Lee, and in his flock will be community groups that are associated largely with families who have kids who are a part of the Central Youth Ministry, plus Bridges community groups. And in addition to that, any families that have kids that are in junior high or high school who are not in community groups will automatically be placed in Pastor Huey's flock. Flock 4 will be led by Pastor Sam Kim, and in his flock will be community groups that are associated largely with families with college-age students and above, and also Bridges community groups. And again, any families with children who are college-age and above who are not in community groups will also be placed in Pastor Sam Kim's flock as well. So one of the big differences regarding our flock system going into the future is that every member of our church will be placed in a flock, either by the community group that they're a part of or by their life stage, so that every member of our church knows who the pastor is that will be in charge of shepherding them and caring for them. And I, as the senior pastor, I will be visiting all the community groups and all the flocks and try to meet as many people in our church as possible. With these 4 new flocks, these will be the pastoral responsibilities. Every pastor will be committed to visiting twice a month community groups in their flocks. And in addition, if there's ever a pastoral need or crisis that arises from any member of our church, we know what pastor is responsible to respond to that need because of the flock system. And in addition to all of that, myself, along with my wife, when she's able and available, we will do pastoral visits at least twice a month to different community groups in all of the 4 flocks. As you can see, in order for the members of our church to have access to the pastors of our church, it really would be helpful if you are in a community group. So if you're not in a community group, let me encourage and urge you to join one, because that is when you'll get to spend unhurried and intimate time with the pastors of our church. And also, for this flock system to work, we need community groups. And in order to have more community groups, we need community group leaders. So if you've ever thought about or even prayed about serving as a CG leader, this is the time to do so. I would encourage you to volunteer to lead a community group and help us work this new flock system. With our new flock system, we don't want to just encourage connection with you and your pastors, but we also want to encourage connection with you and other members of our church. So to that end, we're trying to think through, come up with some creative ways where these flocks can be places where people can connect with one another. And one of the things that we're thinking about is having a quarterly, a flock praise and prayer night, where one flock gets together on a Saturday evening for a time of praise and worship, where I'll be there to give the devotion along with your flock pastor, and we'll get to pray for the church together. We'll pray for one another. And also, if you would like to receive prayer from your pastor or from myself, we'll be there to pray with you and to pray for you. And also, we're planning a year-end church-wide picnic with what we're going to call Flock Olympics, where flocks will get to compete against one another for prizes, and we'll just have a lot of fun playing silly Korean games and eating good food and just laughing and having a great time together. This upcoming new year, we want to see our church more connected, being together, enjoying together more than ever before. And we're praying and hoping that our new flock system will help us to do that.
Hello, Christ Central family. My name is Sujin, and I serve as the Director of Youth Ministry and CCI here at our church. I have an exciting announcement about our youth ministry. We have heard your concerns. We've put a lot of thought and care into thinking through what the next steps for our youth ministry may be to address those concerns. And the staff have come to a decision to launch a separate youth service starting this fall kickoff. The service will take place during our second service time from 11 o'clock to 12:30 p.m. And for now, the plan is to have a slightly shortened service from 11 to 11:55, and then have small groups from 12 to 12:30. We will no longer be serving lunch. The children are now able to join you and the families for lunch after service. But we did want to maintain kind of that close-knit community that they had in their small groups, and so we will be preserving those times. This is a lot different from what we've done in the past, and there's going to be a lot of transitions taking place, a lot of things that we'll probably have to work through, figure out as we go. And most likely when we kick off in the fall, we won't start with a brand new service right away, but most likely the students will be joining second service for worship, announcements, catechisms, etc. in the beginning, and then dismiss for a separate sermon in the large NPR afterwards. And so we will likely start with that, but once we have a full team assembled for youth group, for praise team, and for media team, etc., then we will kick off a full service, hopefully in January. We are hoping that this separate service will address some of the main concerns that were brought up, that I'm hoping with this separate service and a separate welcoming team, a separate praise team, etc., to fill the service, our students will take more ownership of their church experience, and that youth group will feel more like their own youth group for them. I also feel that this service will help them to have more of a group identity and help with group cohesion. And I also believe that with Pastor Huey being the main preacher of the service and the other pastors sometimes rotating in, he'll speak directly to the youth students, meaning that they will get a much more contextualized teaching aimed at them moving forward. So there's a lot of changes happening. There's a lot of work that needs to be put in. And I'm asking all the parents and students to really step up this coming year and to help this service happen. I will be reaching out with more specific information on how you can volunteer and help moving forward But I am excited for the changes to come, and please keep the youth ministry in your prayers as we launch this big endeavor this fall. Thank you.
Hello, Christ Central family. I'm so glad to be here with you, and I get a chance to talk to you about our All Church Sundays and what we've been talking about as a staff, the steps that we really want to take to encourage our families to come together. So before we begin on how that will look, we want to find out and go back to why we have All Church Sundays in the first place. Well, if we look at the Bible, we look at God's word for us, it has many times in the Old Testament that God calls the family together. He calls all of the Israelites, that means from the very, very young, the very, very old, and so all together he calls them to gather. So in the same way, our All Church Sundays take the same model. We believe that from the very, very young to the old, all ages, intergenerationally, that we are to gather together as one family. And that means we get to celebrate that every All Church Sundays. It is also a time that as All Church Sundays, we get to cherish what it means to do our primary purpose of our life as believers. It is to worship. And that means as family together, we get to cherish and look forward to these times to worship together. It is not just a time to be individuals, but it is a time for us as members of a community of faith that we get to include everyone together and in one voice worship our God. That's why this is so exciting. So, as covenantal worship happens, it is when we are rooted in God's covenantal promises in the Bible, and we are one family through the blood of Christ. That's why we get together for all church worship. So what does this mean then? We know that first of all, that means we recognize all stages of life. We know that every stage of life is different with all its joys, with all its hardships, every different part of it. We celebrate it almost like, if you can think of it, like a family reunion, right? We look forward to these moments where families can get together, but we also recognize that that means every family member is going to come with different elements, from the very young to the old. If that was the case, we recognize the stages and we make adjustments. So how do we do that in our All Church Sundays? And how will that look like? Well, if we're recognizing that the young are very there, and the families with young children are also there, and all different stages after that, we think about the sermon series, and one of the elements that we are going to change is for an all-church sermon series. So that means any of the sermon series that we're going to be doing, it's going to apply or have direct application to children and youth. This also means that with children and youth being involved in our All Church Sundays, just as believers receive and give during these times, kids and youth get to also receive. That means these moments, they get to receive and look around, and they get to learn from their church family members that worship is cherished, and they get to also learn what it means to worship. They need to see others around them, aunts, uncles, moms, dads, grandparents, learn from them how to worship. But that doesn't also mean they just look. They're just not receiving, but that they are also giving. They themselves have a lot to teach us adults too. So for them, this might look like at All Church Sundays that they will contribute by serving. This might mean serving in different parts of our elements of worship. This might mean seeing them outside, greeting you at the doors. Any part of the worship time that day, we want to celebrate who they are and what they can do. These also parts of these times are times when we can also celebrate spiritual milestones. As you already know, we already do communion because it's a time for families when you get together. We have a meal together, just like family reunions, right? Well, the other parts of this is that we get to celebrate things like confirmations, infant baptisms, these spiritual milestones where we celebrate their way to their faith and growing in their faith. So we want to continue to do those. We look forward to all the ways that we can, and we're working out all the details of what this might look like, but we hope that from this point on, our church family can celebrate these moments of All Church Sundays and everyone can come.
Hi, this is Pastor Albie. I'm going to give a quick sound update on what we've been doing to address the sound issues at our church. Number one, we hired a sound consultant, so we've been working with him for the past couple months. He did a couple things. He retuned our system. Secondly, we ended up turning off 2 of our speakers because we realized it's just too loud, and so we turned off 2 speakers. And also, our sound consultant is providing training and mix training for our sound engineers. Oftentimes, it's not always the volume, but it's the mix. And sometimes it can sound a little harsh, and that's where we're trying to figure out how to have a better mix. And so we've been working with our sound consultant, and also our sound technician, Thomas, has been doing a lot of work to help improve our mix. So overall, we've been also running lower volumes in general, but also on all church Sundays, we are running lower volumes, especially for the kids in our sanctuary. Next, we also upgraded our sound monitoring system. So we upgraded to a smart V7, which is the industry standard in measuring decibel levels. So we have real-time decibel measuring, and so we can see just where we are at, so that we can really be where we want for our sound levels. And lastly, again, we've been working with our sound team. We hear all the concerns, and we're doing our best to address all these issues. But we're thankful for your patience, and we're going to continue to do the best that we can so that we all can worship together at our sanctuary and our church.